DuPont is accused of murdering 36-year-old wrestler David Schultz, who won the Olympic gold medal in 1984. He was training for the '96 Olympics. Schultz lived and trained on the DuPont estate.
Most people see sports as a path to glory. The lights, the trophies, the chance to be remembered as the greatest of all time. But behind the roar of the crowd lies something darker. Tonight, we uncover 3 chilling cases where the pursuit of greatness turned into a nightmare. From a secluded wrestling compound that ended in murder to a training camp where ambition burned hotter than the human body could endure, to occult rituals in the world's most popular sport, soccer, that invited something darker onto the field. Welcome to the Lost Tapes 404, where horror legends meet true stories. Grab your gear, dim the lights, and remember, greatness always comes at a price. Our first story takes us to rural Pennsylvania, where a millionaire's sports paradise became the stage for paranoia, betrayal, and murder. In the 1980s, John DuPont, an eccentric heir to one of America's richest families, founded Foxcatcher Farms. On the surface, it was an athlete's dream. A sprawling private estate, state-of-the-art wrestling facilities, and generous sponsorships. DuPont invited America's best wrestlers to live and train there, offering them money, housing, and the promise of Olympic gold. But beneath the surface, Foxcatcher was something else entirely. DuPont became more than just a sponsor. He positioned himself as a mentor, almost a prophet. Wrestlers were expected to follow his rules, obey his whims, and treat him with reverence. His charisma drew athletes in, but his paranoia and erratic behavior soon turned the compound into a cult-like prison. He carried firearms around the estate. He told wrestlers that people were spying on him through walls. He even once claimed that 3 trees outside were bugged by the CIA and could move on command. Friends who visited recalled that the mansion's hallways felt heavy, like the air itself was charged with tension. Slowly, what began as a training ground for champions became a place of fear. And then came the tragedy. On January 26, 1996, DuPont drove to the home of Dave Schultz, an Olympic gold medalist and one of the most beloved figures in American wrestling. In front of Dave's wife and child, DuPont pulled a gun and shot him 3 times, killing him instantly. Witnesses said DuPont's face was blank, his eyes cold, as if he wasn't even present in his own body. The murder shocked the sports world. How could a place built for glory end in bloodshed? The American wrestling community was devastated, and many athletes admitted they'd seen the warning signs long before that day.
After the game, seeing his wife and son in the lounge.
When police arrived at Foxcatcher Farms to arrest DuPont, he barricaded himself inside his mansion for 2 days. Law enforcement surrounded the compound, unsure what he would do next. Finally, DuPont surrendered, stepping out of his fortress of paranoia to face justice.
48 hours after it began, John DuPont's standoff with police ended, with the heir to the DuPont chemical fortune being taken into custody.
He was convicted of third-degree murder in 1997 and sentenced to prison, where he would spend the rest of his life. He died behind bars in 2010, still insisting he'd been the victim of conspiracies. Foxcatcher Farms was abandoned soon after. The once proud estate became overgrown and silent. Locals said the gym lights would flicker at night, even though the power had long been cut. Others swore they saw shadowy figures moving on the mats, practicing drills in the dead of night. Some claimed they could still hear Dave Schultz's voice echoing faintly, calling out encouragement to teammates who were no longer there. Foxcatcher promised greatness. Instead, it became a tomb, a reminder that sometimes the darkest battles are fought far away from the spotlight. If Foxcatcher was about the corruption of mentorship, our next story is about the brutal cost of ambition, the human body pushed beyond its limits until it breaks. In the summer of 2001, Minnesota Vikings offensive lineman Korey Stringer arrived at training camp in Mankato, Minnesota. At just 27 years old, he was already a Pro Bowler, one of the best at his position. The sky was the limit. But football has always demanded sacrifice, and at that camp, the sacrifice would be fatal. Temperatures soared to over 110 degrees on the field. Players wore full pads, running drill after drill, sweat pouring off their bodies. The air shimmered with heat rising from the turf, and even the most hardened veterans admitted it felt suffocating. Coaches shouted, demanding more, ignoring the warning signs of exhaustion. Stringer vomited repeatedly, staggered during water breaks, and was leaning on teammates just to stay upright. But instead of pulling him out, the staff pushed him harder. By the end of practice, Stringer collapsed on the turf. His body temperature was measured at 108 degrees. His organs were failing. Hours later, he was dead of heat stroke. His death sent shockwaves through the NFL. Players were horrified at how quickly ambition had turned into tragedy. Teammates were haunted by the memory of seeing him stumble, his face pale and drenched in sweat, his lips begging for water. Trainers later admitted they thought he would push through it. But this wasn't just fatigue, it was the body shutting down. In the weeks that followed, strange stories emerged from the practice fields. Some players said they heard Korey's ragged breathing echoing in the empty heat. Others claimed they saw a massive shadow moving across the turf long after sundown, as if a giant lineman was still running drills, refusing to quit. One security guard swore he heard the sound of cleats pounding the ground, though the field was deserted. The field where Korey collapsed was later resurfaced, but the story of his death remains burned into NFL history. His widow turned her grief into advocacy, pushing for heat stroke prevention and player safety reforms. But for those who were there that day, the image of Korey collapsing under the merciless sun still lingers. It wasn't just a death, it was a warning. A reminder that ambition can demand more than the human body can give. Our first story showed us isolation. The second showed us ambition pushed to the edge. But our last story takes us into something even darker: the rituals that invite forces no coach can control. In South America, soccer is more than a sport. It's religion. And like any religion, it comes with rituals, some sacred, others sinister. For decades, whispers have spread about players and coaches turning to witch doctors, shamans, and occult practitioners to give an edge. Sometimes it's blessings for victory. Other times, it's curses cast on rivals. And the results have been chilling. One of the most infamous stories comes from Brazil, where rival fans buried 7 black cats at the entrance of a stadium to curse the home team. For years afterward, the club's performance plummeted. Star players went down with freak injuries, matches were lost in humiliating fashion, and coaches claimed they felt a dark energy in the locker room. Some players refused to even enter through that gate, convinced the curse was waiting there. It wasn't until priests were brought in to perform exorcisms, burning incense, sprinkling holy water, and finally digging up the cat carcasses that the team's fortunes began to turn around. But not all rituals end with cleansing. In Argentina, several clubs were accused of hiring macumberos, practitioners of Afro-Brazilian black magic, to tip the scales before important matches. These weren't just prayers. Players reported being pressured into midnight ceremonies where animals were sacrificed, their blood smeared onto jerseys. Some described being told to cut their own skin to seal the pact. Others said they woke the next morning sick, weak, or covered in scratches they couldn't explain. And when rival teams faced them, the results could be terrifying. There are reports of players collapsing mid-game with sudden seizures. Others broke bones in bizarre accidents without contact. At least one death on the pitch was later rumored to have been the result of a curse, not coincidence. Even today, whispers of these practices linger. South American players admit privately that they still wear talismans, beads, or charms during matches, not for faith, but for protection. Coaches have been known to hire spiritualists in secret, fearing that refusing might invite the curse upon themselves. For fans, it may be dismissed as superstition, But for players who step onto fields where sacrifices once stained the grass, it's survival. And for anyone watching closely, it's a chilling reminder. Sometimes the price of greatness isn't sweat or pain or even blood. Sometimes it's your soul. 3 stories: a secluded compound turned into a murder scene, a training camp that demanded a life, and rituals that brought blood and darkness onto the world's biggest stage. In him, the question is what an athlete will sacrifice for glory. But in real life, we already know the answer. Athletes have given everything: their health, their sanity, even their lives in the name of greatness. Some call it ambition, others call it obsession. And a few whisper that something else lurks behind the pursuit of glory, something watching, something waiting. So next time you cheer for your favorite player, remember, the quest to be the greatest of all time doesn't always end with victory. Sometimes it ends with horror. We drop new terrifying stories every Friday at 5 p.m. Subscribe if you're brave enough. Stay curious, stay safe, and remember, some curses don't need to be written in a playbook. They're written in blood.